Man, what an entrance. So I'm going into my 8th season of coaching coaching wrestling, and I'm going into my 18th year of participating in this sport of wrestling that I owe so much to. I'd like to take you back to my introduction to this sport. So initially for me, wrestling and competing and being competitive in the sport was not my goal. I just wanted to make friends. We had just moved to Skokie. I was going into my freshman year and moving all over the Chicagoland area and different suburbs. I knew Skokie was going to be home because my mom worked across the street from the high school and it was in walking distance. So I knew worst case scenario, I could bring my sister to anything I had on campus and be able to walk back home safely. So I knew I needed friends because all the moving around, I knew that my friend group was going to be extremely important in high school. So freshman year rolls around and wrestling, like some of my wrestlers might know, wrestling welcomes everyone with open arms. That year wrestling on the freshman level now, it was freshman, JV, and varsity. At the freshman level, I won about 50% of my matches. And it was fun, but the most important thing was I found my friend group. I found friends. So going into my sophomore year, we have a routine down. Summertime two-a-days for football, fall football, wintertime wrestling. Mind you guys, listen, nothing has changed in my mindset. I'm still doing it just to kick it. That's it. I just want friends. Well, going into my sophomore season, in the preseason of wrestling, the varsity starter quits. And we're too deep at the weight. It's me and him. I was getting ready to make my JV debut and just coast along, but I got moved up to varsity. That year on varsity, I went 3-23. Going into our regional tournament, which is the beginning of our postseason, it goes regionals, sectionals, and then state. At regionals, the top 3 athletes qualify for the sectional tournament. So at warm-ups, I see my coach come back from the seating meeting, and he comes down and he said, "Mike, I had to fight those coaches off you. They all wanted to wrestle you first match." I said, to no surprise in my mind, of course, I'm 3-23. He says, "Well, you draw the 2 seed." In my mind, I was waiting for a joke to come around, but he had a serious look on his face, and he said, "But I want to let you know, I bet the opposing coach $20 you would pull the upset. I looked at him, and nothing changed. That was the first time I felt what the belief of someone could do for me. At that tournament, I end up upsetting the 2 seed first round. I end up getting into the semifinals, and I win my semifinal match and take second. I end up qualifying for the sectional tournament with a 5-24 record. Sometimes the belief you have in someone can propel them beyond their wildest dreams. I'd like to take you guys on another concept of outside of belief, family is very important in regards to wrestling. There's something about combat sports and being able to trying to hurt somebody and them trying to hurt you, and at the end of it, you come together and you kind of like each other. I want you to think about a UFC press fight or a boxing press fight. You see the press fight, and you're like, man, these guys hate each other. You watch the fight, and they're hitting each other with malicious intent. But after the fight, they come together in the middle of the mat. They share a space, and they praise each other. They're happy each other made it out okay. There's a bond that forms. And that's kind of like wrestling practice. Because in wrestling practice, your coach is going to praise you for holding your opponent on their back in the wrestling room or pushing them against the wall and making them fight off their back. But the bond that's created is, for the person being put on their back, it's probably the first time anyone has ever made them feel everything they had. No one has probably ever put that person in a position where they had to be vulnerable. And to the person who's giving the beat down or given the hard lesson, they can appreciate somebody fighting back for the duration of practice. And when you do that every single day, you end up wanting to see the other person succeed. So if I'm the person given the hard lesson, I want to see that person succeed because I see all the suffering they do on the daily. and the same vice versa. And you're able to find those things in the room after a 2-hour practice when you're both sweaty and someone has a black eye and you don't take anything personal. But what's interesting about wrestling is you don't really understand the respect you have on your team until you make a move that causes you to see how much respect you have in that moment. Going into my first year as a coach, I was fortunate enough to coach on the same team I was an athlete on. I was competing for an assistant coaching job with a 3-time All-American whose wrestling accolades shattered mine. But I knew I could recruit, and I stuck to recruiting. I stuck to what I was good at, and I used recruiting to get my foot in the door, and I used recruiting to help me learn how to coach wrestling. So winning that position, I was still in a dilemma because I was teammates with all these guys before. And I was supposed to wrestle on that team, but I lost a semester of eligibility. So there was a lot of connection with that group of guys that I was a teammate, but now I'm into this coaching role. And the other dilemma was I was roommates with someone who was still a member on that team. So one of the rules I made when I was becoming a coach was if you're late to team lifts or if you're late, you're going to make the team run. And you can't run with them. You're going to be on the stopwatch, start and go, until, maybe it was 10 minutes one day or maybe until I didn't like it, until I liked it. So the first few times I got a lot of bark back, you can only imagine, from my teammates. A lot of people tried to check me, but I held it down. Hey, this is the rule. This is what we're doing. We agreed to this. But secretly I was cheating those guys because my teammate, my roommate, would always oversleep his alarm. I'd have to go in his room, wake him up, turn his alarm off, and then we would go to practice or go to weights. And we lived off campus, so he would drive us there. And it was about 1.5 miles away. So one morning, it was in the wintertime. I knew he wouldn't expect me to do this, but I set my alarm a little earlier. And when my alarm went off, I knew he wouldn't wake up for his, but I made sure I got to school. I ran in the winter, got to weights. And when the team saw me walk in, there was some tension because they didn't see my roommate, who was a member of the team. Yo, Coach, Mike, where's so-and-so? I don't know. You call him. Well, don't you live with him? He's a grown man. He walks in late. It's tense. You got to remember, these are my teammates. I was supposed to put a singlet on with those guys. As he walks in, I impose my will. Hey, you got to make the team run. And I made him run. In that moment, I went from one of the bros to Coach Mike. But I did lose the rest of my rides the rest of that winter. So you can only imagine I had no car and I had to figure out how to get there. But I learned something there. I learned I didn't need to be dependent on anyone. I didn't need to be dependent in anything to get the job done. And through that walking, I learned someone was going to pay for all the walking I had done. Whether it was in Great Falls or whether it was in LeGrand, someone was going to pay for those miles I walked. At some point, I was going to get my time. So imposing your will, you get a reaction. My high school coach imposed his will on me. He actually made me compete. I imposed my will on my roommate. The relationship was a little tricky for a while. We were best friends, but eventually he thanked me because I helped him break a habit that he needed to break. And now he's finishing med school. But imposing your will as an athlete is a little different. And I know some of you haven't wrestled before, so I think the best way for me to explain dominance in wrestling, I'm going to talk about a boa constrictor and I'm going to talk about a rabbit. Now, the boa's bite isn't what kills the rabbit. It's the boa's ability to wrap around the rabbit and squeeze. The boa bites to secure where the rabbit is, but it squeezes what puts the rabbit away, and it doesn't start to eat until the rabbit is completely put away. The boa might loosens its lock just for the rabbit to start to move a little bit, just to tighten the lock and put the lock exactly where it wants it. Patience. It's not going to try to feed too early, because if it feeds too early and the rabbit gets out of the bite, it loses its food. The boa has to control. And that's wrestling. Because in wrestling, the margin of victory or the dominance that you have in a match is what determines how great you can be. If I can take this human, put him in this position and get him on the ground and get his shoulders planted against his will, and I can do that every match, I can be great. But I've come to learn that imposing your will is more than just wrestling. It's more than just being in competition. Imposing your will is everything. It's from applying for a job, applying for grad school, trying to get a promotion. You have to put everything out on the line and explain to the person that is trying to hire you or is interviewing you or reviewing your application that you are fit for the job and that you belong. And you got to make them believe that you're the person to do it. Imposing your will. Now, when I think about imposing my will and even breaking barriers, I think it all goes hand in hand. And yes, I think breaking barriers are your ability to get over the hump, figure out what you need to do to be a winner, figure out what you need to do to pass the class that you need to pass. But I think it's a little deeper than that. Breaking barriers to me is not only what you can do, but what can you get someone else to do? Can you get somebody else over that barrier a little easier than you did? Heck, can you make or try to get this person to be a better person than you? See, I think wrestling's cool because you build a strong wrestler. Yeah, you build a strong wrestler. She can win matches. She could probably be the national champ. She could probably be great in the sport of wrestling. But I think fostering the growth and helping women understand that they can be great, not just on the mat, in anything. That a strong woman has more value than a strong wrestler, regardless of how many years of wrestling that strong wrestler has, because a strong wrestler can wrestle. A strong woman can do anything. Thank you guys for your time. Love and respect.